In this video, I want to give you a tour of how I use raw stones and a few simple tools to cut the stones to go around what I call a round arch, which is the stonework that you see here around a round window. Well, this is where I cut the stones that you've seen for the round arch in place in the house. And I just want to go through the process. This is something I've come up with on my own. There really aren't a lot of people out there who still know how to do traditional stonework. So how to take stone like this and to work it with simple tools in a semi-old-fashioned sort of way and turn it into some sort of a structure. So what you're seeing here is probably the culmination of about 30 years of struggle trying to figure out how to do stuff like this. I think I've got an optimal system given the level of tools I have. Maybe there's something new I can do out there, I don't know. But what you see here, first of all, is the plywood patterns that I made for the arch that I want to build. There's no way that you can just eyeball these things, eyeball the shapes you need when you're out here working with stone. You need to figure all that out ahead of time, and that's what you see here. This is half of an arch, half of the round arch. I don't need to do twice as many patterns because I just flip them over. This is side A here. There's a corresponding side B. So this is half of the arch, and my job here is to cut the stones to shape. I want to be as precise as I can and follow and reproduce the shapes of these patterns. There's going to be more work to do later on, closer to the building. And that's when I'm going to be using some hand chisels and shaping and using an air hammer as well to create the finished stones that are ready to lay up top. Now, one particularly modern tool I like to use here is this stone saw. This makes the work a lot easier and a lot more precise. This is just a masonry cutoff saw. It's the biggest that I can find. I have a couple of these. If you want to do this kind of work, the bigger the better. This spins a 14-inch diamond abrasive wheel, and it also has a hookup for a garden hose, so I can squirt water into the cut. These blades don't need water in order to function, but they last longer, and most importantly, it keeps the dust down. Cutting stone is a very dusty process if you don't have some kind of water to turn that dust into a slurry. So this stone is quite thick. It's about, I think it's about 11 inches thick or so. The depth of stone that I need to do the full thickness of the wall is 9 inches. And these stones have to go from outside all the way to the inside because you're going to see the inside edges of the stones around the window opening. So this blade can't cut that deep. I wish it could. It just doesn't have the diameter for that. So what you'll see is how I cut as deep as I can with the stone saw, following the outline, and then use these wedges in the gap in the saw kerf that I cut and tap them in and split the stone the way I want it to. If you look over here on this piece, I've already been using this for other stone parts. You can see the depth of the saw cut, and then you can see the splitting that happened afterward because of these wedges. This is particularly good stone. It's nice and even grained. It behaves well. Not all stone is like this, but this works quite well for this job. The face of the stone, the part we're gonna see, is up here, and that's going to take some working and shaping to get it to look nice as well. But none of the saw cuts will be seen in the finished project. I'm going to show you how all that works a little bit later, but that's the process in a nutshell. And now I'm just going to start marking out some patterns and fire up that big saw and make some mess. So essentially what I'm trying to accomplish here is to impose a certain regularity on material that's not only not too regular, but not very yielding to how I want to shape it. Stone is hard. So my first step is to mix and match some of these patterns to try and get the most out of this chunk of stone. I've already gotten a lot of good stuff out of it, but I want to make sure I get everything I can out of it. They don't make this stuff anymore, so I want to be precious with it. So this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm lining up these patterns so that when I make a cut, it's going to do for both of these pieces. When I make this cut here, it's going to do for both of these pieces. And I'm going to have to cut here and cut here. I suppose I could turn this around and, yeah, actually, I think I'm going to do that. Yeah. So now this cut is going to do for these two pieces, and then I'll finish up with a cut there. So I'm just going to be cutting here, 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 and here. And that's going to give me these surfaces that I want. And then I'm going to go at each stone individually and follow them and make other cuts around so that I end up with chunks of stone that are exactly these shapes. I need to then move on and do the other patterns and then the other side of the round arch as well. And that's all the work that I'm going to do here in my stone yard. The rest of the fine tuning and shaping will happen up what I call a stone bench, which is a heavy kind of wooden basin full of sand where I can chisel without having to bend over. So that's the process in a nutshell, and I'm just going to start doing some tracing here. You go through a lot of Sharpie markers with something like this because the stone is so abrasive, but the nice thing about it is that it doesn't wash off. You're going to see that it's kind of a messy process once we get going because all that stone dust is turned into slurry, into mud, and you can use a pencil instead of a marker, but then you have to mark the lines ahead of time with the stone, actually score the stone, because the pencil line just gets washed off. So I am eyeballing the amount that I'm going to lose for the saw cut here. And if you notice earlier with that pattern that I laid out on the rock, there's about 3/4 of an inch allowance for mortar joints between the stones. So that allows a certain fudge factor. You can position the stone. When I show you how I lay the stones, I'll show you how I keep track, how I keep the stones going in the proper orientation so that any error doesn't accumulate. But now it's just a matter of marking, and then I'll fire up the saw. So I've got my lines completed here. I've extended all of the lines so that I know where I need to cut once I start freeing up the individual stones. I've got the hose hooked up to the stone saw. I'm not going to use any more water than I need to, because the more water there is used, the dirtier it gets. That's about the flow of water I want. I mean, I could make it like that, but it's going to make me a whole lot dirtier than I need to be. So I'm just going to turn on a little bit, just enough to stop the dust from flying. And I'm going to make this cut first. We're going to cut it and then split it and then free this chunk from the rest of the stone. So that's as far as I can take the cut. As I said, I wish they had saws with deeper blades, but they don't. One of the challenges here is to create cuts that are square to the face of the stone when the stone isn't necessarily sitting flat. I've gotten pretty good at that, but every so often I'll make a mistake and I'll angle too far over. But right now, it's still attached, of course, it's time to use those wedges I was telling you about. Now this is pretty well behaved stone, but you never really know for sure what stone's going to do. So we want to go gently with quite a few wedges for the space we have. What I want to happen, you can watch down here, what I want to happen is for the split to just continue on down in the same plane as the cut. And if I can do that, then I'm okay. If something wonky happens, then I've probably lost one of these stones. I mean, if it goes wonky this way, I can still salvage this stone. If it goes wonky that way, this is no good. But let's see how we do. You'll notice the pitch of the wedges gets higher as the tension increases. Kind of like a game show when you're waiting for answers. Oh, okay, the pitch has changed. Not great. Let's see what that looks like. This stone's okay. We'll have to pull it apart and see how far the crack has gone this way. I may still be able to use this stone because this is longer than I need it to be. But just a crowbar here. Well, this one's certainly fine. Now this stone was the keystone, and we were all the way down here. So I think this might be okay. I'll try it. We need 9 inches of depth here, and if we can avoid this little stick-in part, then we're okay. But that's the process in a nutshell for the first cut. Now I'm going to make some other cuts to get the face of this stone the way I want it to be. So more of the same until we get a replica of the pattern, at least as viewed from the face. So my next move with this stone is to complete the cuts required. There'll be 3 more cuts. Here, here, and then 1 more here to nip that off. It's going to be pretty much like what you've seen, except before I turn the water on, I'm going to lightly cut along these lines. That's so I'll have something to see when the going gets muddy, because all that mud is going to obscure my marker line. So that's what I'll be up to here. Now, I know from experience that when we start trying to lop off relatively small pieces of stone like this, or over here on this side, that the wedges aren't going to cut it. If I wedge this, I guarantee you it's going to break down that way. So now that this stone is small, I'm going to prop it up in different positions and just continue the cut around the perimeter so that I'm using my saw so that we don't run into any problems like this sort of thing. Now, this can easily be fixed, but cutting these little pieces off definitely requires more stonework, saw work. So that's what I'll do just to finish it up. We're almost there. This is the bottom now. I'll continue this cut around, and then when I come back I'll show you what a stone looks like when I'm finished here in the stone yard, and how I'm going to further refine it later. So I'm finished rough cutting a bunch of stones for that round arch. I've loaded them into the loader tractor and brought them to the place where I'm going to refine them. We were successful with the saw, but the stones still aren't refined enough for use on the wall yet. So come on over here and I'll show you the challenges and how I go about meeting them. So this is a stone, one of the stones that's going to fit around the perimeter of that round window. It's one of the stones that are up near the top right and left hand corner, and I made it with this pattern you've seen before. So it's number 8. It's the small, because I make larger ones as well, and it's side A. If you can think about it, there's a mirror image version of each stone when it's installed. So you can see here we got a nice shape. That's the first step. But there's several problems here. One problem is that on the underside, so this is the bottom of the stone. If you could imagine the round window is in here, we're going to be seeing a certain amount of each one of the stones in this area. And that doesn't look very nice when it's sawn like that. It's also not refined enough. We have uncut areas here and sawn areas here, so that's a problem. Another problem is up here. This is about as good as we can get with a saw, but that's no good, so we need to remove that. Another thing is that the face of the stone, so this is the side that's going to face out, is not exactly 90 degrees to the bottom edge. Some stones are farther from 90 than others. This one's fairly close, but we're going to need to refine it. And the edge of the stone isn't too regular. I mean, it kind of sticks out a bit here, the face goes in there. So we're going to need to do what we call facing the stones. But the first step is to make this bottom surface, the surface we're going to see around the outside of the opening, look nice. And the tool I'm going to use to make that happen is this tool here. It's called an air hammer. There's an interesting story behind it. This was invented in the 1880s by a young man in his 20s at the time. His last name was Holden, and he wanted to invent a tool to speed the work of stonemasons. So as you'll see in a little while, traditionally stonemasonry is done with hitting a chisel like this, or a point, or other tools. Holden took that same idea, but instead of hammering the tool with a hammer, this air-powered tool does the job. So air flows into it, it moves a piston back and forth quite quickly, and it imparts a vibration and hammering action. There's all kinds of different tools that fit into these air hammers, and I have 2 different sizes of air hammers here. This is called a bushing head. Looks kind of like a meat tenderizer, and this creates a very nice looking stippled surface, as you're going to see. The interesting thing is I bought this new, but as I said, it was invented in the 1880s, and believe it or not, the design hasn't really changed much since then. So it's not very often you can buy a brand new tool that's based entirely on a, almost 140-year-old design. So step number 1, you're gonna make this face look nice. It's a loud, dusty, bothersome process, but it works really well. So bear with me as I get suited up here. Now, I'm not finished yet, but can you see how much nicer that looks? It just gives a whole bunch of random little dots here. It smoothens the stones out. Now, I've been using that air hammer full blast, full air pressure here in the center, but I'm going to throttle it back a little bit for the edges. Even when I throttle it back, it's going to chip those edges a little bit. That's no problem though, because there's mortar joints on either side of the stone right here. And after I install the stone, there's going to be mortar kind of sticking out on the joint that's on either side. I'm going to go back up onto the building with the air hammer, and I'll re-air hammer the whole thing. It'll take the mortar joints down flat, give them the stippled look, and I'll also make sure that the water flows out of that ledge of stone properly on the bottom where it will accumulate. So I'll just continue for now and finish this up, and then I'll show you the next step. So here you can see the stippling texture done with the bushing head complete. And my next step is to start squaring the stone up. So what I want, this is the face, this is the inside edge. I want those things to be square. So I start by marking. This stone could go in and out. It could go in more over here than there. So I want to choose a spot that will allow me to chisel in the same plane all around this stone. So I got my square lined up with this face of the stone, and just going to mark it here. Now it's time for me to use what looks like a chisel. I guess it is a chisel, but technically it's called a pitching tool. Pitching is what I'm doing right now. It's nice and stout. You can't use just a regular little cold chisel for this. There's too much flex in it. You need something beefy like this. These aren't that easy to find. There's only a few places in North America I know to get these. And I use a 4-pound hammer. So my job is to whittle this stone down, eventually with a line ending right on the pencil line. I'm not going to be able to remove the stone in the center, just around the perimeter, but that's okay because stones look way better when they bulge out a little bit. That's why stonework bulges, generally speaking, when it's hand worked. It's because it's not very convenient to remove stone in the middle, but it's certainly very easy along the edges. So here's what it looks like. I'm not going right to the line just yet. I'm getting close. I'm close enough now that I'm going to go to the line. So I line up the pitching tool on the pencil line, and there. I've got a line that's as precise as it needs to be, and it's square to this bottom face. So I'm just going to continue that all the way around. So I'll just use my square here. Just out of interest, I have a smaller pitching tool here. They come in different sizes. This is only for the finest whittling, for regular hogging off of lots of material. This is the one to use. So, can you see how that's taking shape? I think I'll flip it over and do the bottom now. So, I want the face to be square to the side, so I'll just continue this along. If I do this right, the chiselings will all pretty well line up when it goes full circle. There we go. So this is now what the face of the stone is going to look like when it's mounted on the wall. The edges are all in the same plane. They're all square to the bottom of the stone. And I'm just about ready to finish now, and this doesn't always happen, there's a little bit of a lump here. I could set this stone as it is, but that's going to be kind of troublesome when I go to put wall stones, regular wall stones around it. So I'm going to remove this. I could use the bushing head. If I was going to use the bushing head, I'd use it on this hammer. It's bigger and more powerful. But there's a faster way to remove this stone. This sort of a bushing head completely pulverizes the stone, so it takes a fair amount of horsepower. You're not removing big chunks. There is another tool. This one happens to be broken, but it's still good. I'm still using it. It's called a toothed chisel. I'll show you how it works, because this is the tool of choice for removing large amounts of stone as quickly as possible. Normally there's another tooth here, it's gone, but I just don't want to throw this thing away yet, so I'm still using it a little bit. So that particular size of chisel fits into the big hammer here. There are a handful of different sizes, but this will help me to work that down fairly quickly, and then I think I'll probably end up just finishing it up with the bushing head to make it nice and smooth. So time to make some more noise. That's pretty close, so I'll switch to the bushing head in the big hammer just to finish that off. So there we go. I'm ready to lay this stone, but there's one other operation to do. It's pretty simple. The stone wall I'm working on here, the stone thickness is 9 inches thick. It's certainly not any sort of one of those paste-on jobs. It's full thickness stones that look proper on the corners and round openings. So this stone was cut from material that was thicker than I needed. That's what I wanted it to be. I need a thicker thickness to start with. I'm making this stone now 8 3/4 inches thick from front to back. So the last step here is to mark that dimension and get ready for sawing, because now that I've got a nice face, I just want to make the stone the correct depth from front to back. I could have sawn the stone first, but that's risky, because as I said before, you never really know how a stone is going to behave. They're not entirely predictable. And if I had chiseled this face, for instance, and something had gone wrong, let's say a chunk of stone, had come out of here an inch back from the face as I wanted it, because I've left the stone wider than it needs to be, I could redo the face further back and still not lose the stone. I would just cut off less on this side. So everything went fine, but there's my mark. I'll saw this to final width along with all the others, and then this one will be ready to install and to lay on the wall. So here are all 24 stones of this round arch completed. They're the 4 keystones that you saw me cut earlier, and then the individual stones that correspond to the plywood patterns. So my next step will be to install this on the wall. Regular wall stones don't get cut ahead of time following a pattern like this. That's more of an improvised thing. But when it comes time to laying the stones around the window, these are all pre-cut and ready to go. Thanks for watching. Click here to join the thousands of people who get the Bailey Line Road hands-on how-to newsletter for free every Saturday morning.